Hello there, Dragon Ball Infinity. It's Riz here, and today we're going to be covering actually three logs. We're going to be going over Relok, and it's going to be the story thus far. Now, before we get started, I already did part one of the very first log that they did, an Acolyte's Tale. So if you guys are not really caught up or not really familiar with the character Infernus and what's going on with them, I would recommend that you go through, watch that other video that I did first, so that way you aren't so far behind on what's going on with the character now. But without further ado, hi guys. And yeah, it's going to be the tale of, I think it's pronounced Relok. It kind of reads as either Relok or Relok. English, go figure. But we're going to be covering three of the logs. So it's going to be Kindling, Ignition, and Embers. And these are the three that have come out, and two of them have been rewarded and graded. Embers has not, but we're going to kind of review all of them today. Because like the first one, each one of these chapters is particularly short, and I don't really feel like one of them warrants a whole video, but now that there's three of them, I kind of have some major points that I can talk about. And I will say Infernus 1000, if some of my points I've said in the previous video, and I say them again, I apologize. I don't really go through and watch my videos after I post them, so kind of like what comes off the top of the dome just happens to come off. And if anything is a repeat, my apologies. But we're going to kind of get right into it. So, following an Acolyte's Tale, we go into Relok Kindling. And the synopsis for this one is that Infernus continues his training, this time focused inward, in his ongoing effort to gain basic competence with producing the primal flame. Relok continues to struggle with the concept of being a part of a greater whole within the galaxy, and Infernus sees a window of opportunity beginning to close and now races against a proverbial clock. And this log is what I would consider like a training log. He is in his little apartment. It actually says that he's in the second tier residential block. And that is very specific because throughout this series, Infernus has been kind of laying the groundwork of what it means to be Yondai in this setting, in the Relok Temple. And he's done a very good job of it. They have a caste, they have a society, they have a ranking system, and it's very well fleshed out. After he finishes an Acolyte's Tale, he kind of passes his first training, goes into phase 2. Going into phase 2 gives him better, access to resources. His I would say like monthly allowance gets better. He gets, a better apartment. He gets access to better food because he's training and he's going on to the next step, albeit at a rate that is pretty fast compared to every other individual in here, which we'll talk about later. But in Kindling, it's very interesting to see how he is training, because he's talking very much about, igniting his inner hearth. He's checking the time. He says 15 seconds it took me to do this, and it is not very usable in combat. It actually reminded me of in the filler episode of Dragon Ball Z where Yamcha's gathering his spirit ball, and one of the ancient Saiyans is like, God, my grandmother can gather ki faster than you. If it takes you 15 seconds in the heat of battle to conjure up your ki, then it's not very useful, especially if you're, already in the mix. So he kind of understands that, he even says it's still completely unusable in combat, but he is gaining access to it. He is a tier 0 character who has access to basic energy balls, has access to energy, but since he's still tier 0, he doesn't have proficiency in it, and we're seeing him go through this process. And a lot of this log is specifically talking about the food, and like how it is prepared, and it's like local fish and greens over a hearth. He goes into really great detail about this food that I remember reading it the first time and was like, man, it's actually making me kind of hungry for just a basic fish meal. But he is kind of going through and going over the things that the ascendant had put him through and the trials that he had put them through, because again, this follows right after the Acolyte's Tale, where he faced this adept, and an adept is a rank, and it's someone who's higher than him, and he's kind of going over like, man, like this guy is better than me, and he's just been beating on me, yet somehow I made it. And he's kind of like going through the motions in his head of, okay, what happened in this fight, how can I use this flame gate, as he calls it, to be so where it doesn't tax me as much, it doesn't take as long. And he calls it a timepiece. It's just like a watch, I'm assuming, that he's using to kind of go through with his meditation of like, okay, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to look inward, I'm going to feel all the things that it feels, and like all that stuff I absolutely I love, because I'm a huge Dragon Ball Z nerd. I've always thought about like real life application of how this fantastical anime stuff would happen, how it would feel, how it would, like, how your body would react to it, to opening your inner gates and stuff like that. And it just tells me that he's really sat down and thought about the character and spent time with the character. And the other really big part that I wanted to talk about is this here. So I'm going to see if I can capture this and this right here. Can I move you? Boop. Not that far. Sorry, you guys are watching me screw up in live motion. Okay. And I'm just going to make myself a little bit smaller here. Okay. So he explains what they call prana. And again, this is another world building phrase. And he says that, they call it prana. Most of the universe would recognize it as ki. And that's very significant because, again, there's no other Yondai that we've ever seen on page. So we're learning this culture from Infernus, right? Like, he is the first person that is, making up these words. He's made up, not only this temple and the hierarchy behind it, but now he's telling us, okay, this is what we call ki, and some people call it talent on Konats. Demons have a whole different word for it. Whoever you ask, they have a different name for this, which is something that should exist, right? We as role players only have this earth that we live on as a blueprint for what we do, right? And there are so many different things on our one planet that are all different, right? Like, I hate to say it, but like gas and petrol, it's the same thing. It's just, we call it different stuff. There's even different pronunciations, aluminum and aluminium. And I'm not just talking about, the UK and stuff and the US, but, everything has its own kind of different, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, we have different gods and we have different religions and everything like that. So different things have different words. And yeah, we should have a very diverse language for the same thing across our galaxy. So when I read that, I was like, oh man, that's stuff like that. It's like, yes, makes me feel great. But yeah, and so at the beginning he was doing it in 15 seconds. Now it's up to 17. So as he's been practicing, he's actually getting worse, right? And then at the very end, there's the cool graphic that he did. he basically just says, you know what, forget going through the steps, forget trying to be calm and peaceful and feeling my inner flame gate and everything like that. He just blows through it, right? He just goes through pure emotion and just, that's not the right thing. um, and just blasts out this fire blast, right? And it's kind of like he did like this palm thrust and then it came out from his hand. So really, to me, I mean, this is looking a lot like, bending. That's kind of what the admins always joked about what Yondai was just, it's just Avatar, and I mean, that's gotta be what Razak took his inspiration from. So yeah, he's fire bending, and he almost burns a wall in his apartment, but luckily they put the fire guy in a flame proof room, and from there he was like, I don't know how long I spent. There wasn't an emphasis on speed. I wasn't trying to think too hard. He had just did it. He just did what felt right and pushed his way through. And then he says, okay, so now he's on his next step in his path. And excuse me, I'm just reading through this again. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. Like he then looks to the stars and starts to see that there's endless possibilities, and that's pretty much Kindling, right? It's exactly, it's greatly named because I want to say he is the Kindling that is now starting bigger fires. But there's also like more to this story, which when we go into Ignition, this location is at the Fire Temple Training Pits. It's episode 3. 3 were intended, but it looks like there's more. Oops. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And this is a few months after he kind of blew the fire out from his palm. And in in Ignition, he is in the middle of a fight. He's fighting with a adept warrior, again, above his caste, above his station. And I really like the name for this character, Cinder, because Cinder is one of my favorite Killer Instinct characters. He's just a fire guy. And I hope that's the reason that we picked it, but it's also very, on the nose for fire folk. And this log is all about combat. It's just Cinder is basically, Cinder's a female, by the way. She is basically beating his ass for 90% of this log. And it's a fight log, right? So when I read through it, it is that. And it's well done, but it's just like, can I go through post by post and read it? I probably could, but it's just a fight that takes place between Cinder and Infernus. And again, that's pretty much what happens, except for at the very end, she's beating his ass. And he starts to kind of pick up. He starts to kind of get in tune and speed with her, and then finally he opens up his flame gate, and he hits her harmlessly, and she thinks like, okay, yeah, like I'm just gonna counter you, whatever. But then he blows her away with his palm strike. It's the same exact motion that he did in the previous log, right? So he just took his previous log. This is what his character has been doing, and again, it's a technique, but all it is he's doing a palm strike and fire shoots out. And I would have to assume that, like, in my mind's eye, during this fight, he had been trying it several times when she wasn't beating the shit out of him. And this time he finally hits it, and then the fire blows her across the room, and excuse me, and yeah, then the Ascendant pretty much says, like, hey, that's enough. You two go to the healers. We're done. And the thing about this is that when we kind of see them at the beginning of the fight, She beats him, and he's like, okay, so like that, yeah, she won. That's it. Like I'm pretty, there's no RP energy used. There's no RP health being used here, so we can't see how beat up he actually is. But I'd have to say like he's probably like sub 40 for his health and energy. And then he's like, all right, begin again. And they keep going. And the one thing is that, Infernus is like, I'm already hurt. And I just don't understand. Like, why do they keep pushing me? Like, I can't beat her. Why do you keep pushing me so hard? Like, I actually can't keep this up much longer. Like, the way it's written, it's like he almost is about to pass out because they've been training so hard. So why are we kind of still doing this? Like, this is almost going beyond training. This is getting a little weird. Like, homie might be getting his jimmies off by seeing me get beat up, and I ain't about that. And that, it has its place, definitely. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much Ignition, right? Like, Ignition is, okay, so he's had the Kindling. Now he's learning how to use it in combat, right? Still a tier 0 character, but now he has used at least once his energy ball technique in an actual fight, and it's only just been once, so this is a very, very slow burn. And the thing that I said earlier is that in this arc, Enter Relok, this is episode 3. There were 3 that intended, but it looks like there'll be more. When I finished this log a couple weeks ago, I was like, okay, like the next log needs to be it. Like, if this is what we're going to be reading from this story, the training and the slow build, like we need to wrap it up. and that was just like, that was one of my initial notes of like, yeah, this needs to be done. And literally it was the 4th of July was the day that I was going to originally do this video, and then Thousand put out another one on the 4th of July, which we're going to cover over next. And I was like, man, I wish I could have got this out sooner, because I could have said, like, from what it is, from what we're reading, I mean, having been the one that read all of it, it's like, yeah, I feel like the story needs to wrap up. And not because I'm bored of it, but it's starting to get like a little bit bigger, and it's starting to go a little bit beyond, I feel like, the writer intended. I think it's starting to go beyond being just because this is kind of like a backstory. I don't know where this falls in like the current timeline. But with this kind of training, like, it either needs to be so far back that it's not relevant to current era, or it needs to be a little bit shorter. Like, that was my initial thought after reading Ignition, because what did we see? We got the entrance to the temple. We got, him being pushed. We got him training on his own, him now fighting this woman who's above him. And, he kind of opened up his gate when he needed to. His power kind of came to him when he, called upon it for the first time. And I felt like that was like a good stopping point of like, okay, like, I did all this training. He could still be an adept. He could still be in training, but it's like, okay, you at least got to this point. Now we send you out into the world, because I feel like that's what Infernus needs. I feel like this character needs to now be out and meet the cast, meet Jean, meet Saliath, meet meet Few, meet Ariel, meet Mosin. I think Infernus and Mosin would hit it off great. I feel like these are 2 characters who kind of come up in the same kind of ordeal, like coming up in a temple, having dicks for masters, and being pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, and coming out and being on their own. I feel like that'd be really good. But I just feel like Infernus needs to get out and meet the cast. However, after Ignition, there was one, like I said, put out on the 4th of July. And This is Embers. And this log is another Infernus solo. It's a dialogue, exposition / world building. Location is the Relok Fire Temple, specifically the Healing Ward. And the arc is Enter Relok, episode 4. This is a few days now after Ignition, which again is pretty important because all of these logs have been months between one another. Now this one's just a few days. And the synopsis of this one is Infernus regains consciousness after his match with the adept Cinder and his first on-demand manifestation of the flame that ended said match. Cinder is there to greet him when he awakens and fills him in on some troubling developments amongst their leadership. And finally, drops a large bomb on him regarding the next step in his training. Ends intentionally on a cliffhanger. And I mean, this one is so short. Guys, if you would allow me, I would like the chance to simply read this one for you, if you don't mind. Once I get rid of that text. Okay. Let me lubricate the throat. Bad acting. Here we go. Hey, Acolyte, wake up. Acolyte. The faint feminine voice seemed to come from all around Infernus as he hung there in the inky black void. He tried to turn away from it. It was bright out there. It was painful out there. Here, all was dark, silent, comfortable. Yet the voice persisted and the black void seemed to recede. He could feel a stiff, barely padded platform on his back, and a faint, astringent aroma entered his nostrils. He started to open his eyes, but winced and screwed them shut again, unused to the blinding blur of light and color he was met with. I see you stirring there. Come on, wake up. We need to talk before they come. Acolyte, wake up. Infernus, wake up. He internally grumbled at the persistent, nagging voice, dragging him back to his mind snapped back into focus. That last match in the arena, he had done it somehow. He had channeled the flames in an instant, precisely when he needed it. And then, nothing. He had passed out? He recognized the astringent aroma as belonging to one of the more commonly used poultices by healers, and steeling himself, he slowly opened his eyes. Yep, healers all right. Only the Fire Temple healers would have the audacity to paint the walls of the medical ward in that soothing shade of pink. Shifting with a groan, he turned his head to one side and tensed immediately. Sitting next to the pallet over was none other than Cinder, who had been the bane of his existence for months now and the source of his injuries that had put him here in the first place. Hey, easy there. We're not in the pits right now. This isn't going to be a fight. You can relax. For now, at least. Cinder reverted her gaze to one side, paused there for a long time, before returning her gaze to Infernus. They really run us through the ringer, don't they? She said casually, only for Infernus to remember protocol and make their traditional bow and gesture. Greetings, Miss Adept. May I ask how long I was out? Infernus's head was still carried with some fog, it seemed, but he still regarded his senior attentively. She met his gaze for a few long moments and then laughed quietly. It's all right. Just call me Cinder. Not much point in your going through those motions at this point, I expect. You were out for about 3 days after you bloomed. She said it so casually, but it was true. He still was not entirely certain how he had done it, but he had called forth the flame instantly midst the match. He had satisfied the basic criteria for the third trial. He grinned triumphantly, bowing his head once more. You honor me greatly, Cinder. I had expected it to come to me I hadn't expected it to come to me in such a situation, nor did I expect to be unconscious for days after I did. I suppose I shall need to redouble my try. There's no time for that, Cinder interrupted him in an urgent tone. She cast her glance to the doorway for a quick moment before moving closer to Infernus. Listen, things are not as they seem. There seems to be some kind of breakdown between the temples. I should have moved along to the Earth Temple months ago to continue my training, but all has been silent on that part, and things are moving within the Fire Temple. Infernus's eyes locked onto Cinder's at this. I don't understand. What do you mean? What's happening? What makes it so urgent? He regarded the woman quizzically, masking the seeds of nervousness that had already begun to take root. Look, just let me talk. Cinder spoke quietly but emphatically, and Infernus could do no more than nod and shut his mouth. There's been a greater and greater focus on training lately. You've seen it, the way they've forced you to fight superior foes. I've seen it as well. They've set me against foes particularly adept at, reading my moves. They're forcing us to face our weak points well before we're ready for it. They patch us up until we're mostly healed, and then they throw us back into it again. I fear they're preparing for war. Infernus's jaw dropped at that. War? For what reason? Who would possibly stand to gain from war? Cinder glared at him for a moment, having asked already not to be interrupted. Infernus looked at her for a beat before realizing this, bowing and gesturing as if he was closing his lips with a zipper. She nodded. What is it ever about? It's money, Infernus. Money. With the recent revelations, some of our leaders have realized that our trade potential isn't limited to the other nations of Relok. That the future of commerce is among the stars, and that whomever controls interstellar trade stands to be wealthier than anyone in all of our entire history. And they mean to move us by force. It's only a rumor now, but all the signs are there. And that leads back to you. You, Infernus, have a very big problem on your hands. Infernus leaned forward, his pulse racing, absorbing everything Cinder had told him thus far. Could it all be true? Was war to return to the Yondai with all the disruption and balance it would bring? That was too much to wrap his head around right now. But that last bit, what sort of problem? Cinder sighed heavily and winced slightly before replying. Part of this is about you. Eyes from above are always on us, and apparently some of the dominant factions see you as a mascot of sorts. Because of your talent and your handicap, you represent to them that fire can stand alone. And because of that, pure insanity, might I add, they've demanded the harshest training of all for you. And now that you've bloomed, she hesitated there for a moment before continuing. Look, blooming is the basic requirement for the third trial, but normally there is still quite a bit of training leading up to it. That additional training leaves the acolyte with a nearly 90% chance of surviving the trial. Without it, only about a 25% survive to become adepts. And you are being fast-tracked, basically, as soon as you're fully recovered, they're going to throw you into it. You need to know exactly what you're up against. Infernus's heart pounded in his chest at the onslaught of revelations. The idea of having part in such ridiculous, wasteful idea, even as some kind of symbol against his will, sickened him. But the risk surrounding the mysterious third trial, that concerned him greatly. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He swallowed hard, cleared his throat, then spoke hoarsely. "Tell me." Cinder walked closer to him as she spoke. "So you won't have progressed enough to have realized it yet, but we are naturally limited in our ability to connect with the elements. So, to progress further with one, we must forge a contract, much as the way our ancestors did." She drew closer to Infernus and began to open her robe. Infernus, shocked, scooted a bit further away from Cinder. "What are you—" "Look at me." The words were dispassionate, yet filled with authority, and the flustered Yondai shook his head and turned to look at the adept. The open robes had given a tantalizing look at her figure, but surprisingly, that was not what drew Infernus's gaze. Rather, his attention was drawn to her navel, which seems to bear some sort of tattoo surrounding it. As he stared, the tattoo glowed brightly red before darkening once more. Having demonstrated this, she quickly closed her robe. "The manifestation of my bond with an elemental whose core has taken residence within my flame gate." Infernus was quite surprised to learn this tidbit. "But aren't we more powerful than the elementals?" It was a serious question. The various biomes of Relok all carried populations of elementals in addition to any flora and fauna, and while they were dangerous to the untrained, most acolytes could easily handle a couple of them if necessary, and there was never an issue keeping them well away from cities and villages. "We are more powerful than the ones on this plane, sure." It was as if a pin dropped. "You don't mean—" "I do. For the third trial, you will be sent to the elemental plane of fire itself." To be continued. Cliffhanger ending is cliffhanger. So, with this... that's the wrong one. Sorry. With this, we are getting an actual story being told, right? And this is why, I was saying probably like 10 minutes ago that this story needed to be wrapped up. And while I do feel that it does, it also goes to show you guys that, I'm human, and while I am a roleplay admin for the Dragon Ball Infinity massive or multi-user domain, sometimes I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Sometimes I just need to shut up and let the writer write, because if I had said, like, hey, next log, we gotta wrap this up, we're done, like, it's not going anywhere, we've seen it all. No, like, there's the whole, like, this is an awesome thing. Like, he's gonna go to the elemental plane. I do feel like, though, this should be the end of this solo. And that the going to the elemental plane is his journey that he carries internally while role-playing with other people. I do feel like he should get out. I still feel like he should get out. He should go meet the others. He should go be on, his own quest. And I think that, maybe even Cinder joins him. I really like this character. I think that here she came alive very well on page. I just feel like if it's... I just think it's a bit much for a tier 0 to do, to go to a elemental plane unless you're going to make these elementals really, weaker than they seem to be, or they should be, because you guys kind of hype them up here. And for a tier 0 to go through and handle one, I don't know. If you were to ask for my opinion, which you haven't, or ask for my advice, which you haven't, I would say this would be his quest. Like, every character, while they're out role playing with other people, they kind of have like, yeah, like, I'm here with you, I'm doing this with you, Styx, but, I'm Saliath and I have this other thing that I'm actively progressing forward. Like, I have my story quest that I'm going towards, but I got to get to level whatever. I got to get to level 15 before I can progress on it, But I thought, like, this, when I read Embers, I was like, wow, this is really good, and I gotta do these videos on them. So I've talked to you guys for about 35 minutes. Thank you for hanging out with me the entire time. I thought this was a really good one. I hope you guys enjoyed my reading. Sorry, 1,000, if I screwed it up and it didn't live up to your expectations. I apologize, but I had a really good time reading this. The story is really good. I'm excited to see where it goes, but I am also very excited to see Infernus out in the wild, out of solo land, and just role playing with other people. So, as always, my name is Riz, and I'll see you guys next time.